I think if you want to be an effective communicator, study the people who communicate effectively. And when you do that, you learn what effective communication is.
Welcome to the Smart Talk series, the show for professionals who want strategies, tips, and real talk about all things PR, marketing, and social media. Your host is Melissa Vella-Williamson, an award-winning, accredited, and nationally recognized PR pro and communication thought leader. And now your host, Melissa Vella-Williamson.
Hello and welcome to the Smart Talk series. I'm Melissa Vella-Williamson. This season, our focus is on communication specialties. Today, I'm joined by Pastor Jonathan Mussett. Pastor Jonathan is the assistant lead pastor at Westover Hills Church in San Antonio, Texas. He's a graduate of Stanford University and also holds a PhD in marriage and family therapy from St. Mary's in San Antonio. He's an ordained minister with the Assemblies of God and is dual licensed as a professional counselor and marriage and family therapist in Texas. He loves Jesus, his wife Danae, and kids Aiden and Alexis, coffee, Whataburger, and Texas BBQ, in that order. Welcome, Pastor Jonathan.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm so glad to be here.
Absolutely. A little bit of background from my side, and then I'll ask you to tell us a little bit of your background. I will tell all my listeners that I know Pastor Jonathan, both as a member of his church, but for many years before that, we actually lived near each other, our neighbors. So,
yes.
And I'll tell you, he's authentic on stage and off. And I've always loved your sermons, Pastor Jonathan. So I thought you would be excellent to speak to us here about public speaking. Mm-hmm. So with my point of view, can you tell us a little bit more about your background and your work today?
Well, thank you so much again, Melissa, for inviting me on. And just to say personally, you're so gracious. For those of you who haven't met Melissa in person, she's the real deal. And I encourage you to find ways to connect with her as well. But a little bit about my story is I grew up in South Texas in a very small town on the Mexico border. It's a Spanish-speaking community primarily. I went to college in California, as you heard, at Stanford. And then I realized there's no place like home. California was great, but I said, I've got to get back to Texas. So I moved to San Antonio and very quickly started working. I applied to grad school to become a counselor. And then, even in the midst of all that, I started attending the church that I currently work at. That was where I met my wife, Danae. And after a couple of years later, we got married and we started a family. I thought I was going to be a professional counselor for the rest of my career. But then I got the opportunity to come on the team.
Wow.
And I found out that this is where I needed to be. So I transitioned from a staff role into a pastoral role a couple of years ago. And now I have the privilege of leading and communicating. And I enjoy and love what I do.
Well, you just threw me off, Pastor Jonathan, because when I was thinking about you, I was like, well, he probably always knew he wanted to be a pastor. And part of that, he must have trained in public speaking from a young age on. And so your path wasn't as linear as I think I imagined it. But you are very excellent when it comes to public speaking. In fact, probably a primary draw for me at your church is the message is so sound. It's so heartfelt. You personally do a phenomenal job on stage. You share that message, you share stories, you inspire people to really take action. What kind of training did you receive for this work?
Well, on the public speaking side, I first discovered my love of public speaking in college. I actually took a class in public speaking. Out of all the classes I took at Stanford, it was one of my favorite. And I didn't realize at the time that that was going to be something that I was going to do in my career. I just took the class on a recommendation of a friend, and I found out, wow, this is something I really love doing. And so I wasn't really in a role for the first part of my career doing a lot of public speaking, public communicating. But what I did do as a counselor is I spent a lot of time talking to people. I've always enjoyed hearing people's stories, discovering where they're at, where they're wanting to go, and how can I help them get there. And so some of the public speaking skills were cultivated in private with people and just finding ways to help them get where they want to go and provide messages of hope and inspiration. And that's really what I try to communicate when I'm communicating at church. we call it in the church world preaching, but really it's communicating messages of hope, message of inspiration, messages that help people live day to day, give them things that they can do in their life, in their everyday life, that will make their life better. I also have taken a couple different courses. I took a public speaking boot camp of sorts. I've gone to a couple different conferences specifically on communicating in a faith context. And so a lot of what I've learned about public speaking has been coalescing a lot of information from a lot of different places. So
Yeah.
a lot of what I've learned about communicating has been by being a student of other communicators. I think if you want to be an effective communicator, study the people who communicate effectively. And when you do that, you learn what effective communication is. I think all of us have been in a place where there's people that you have to listen to. There's people that you must listen to, and then there's people you can't stop listening to them. So we have to decide what category we want to be on. And I think all of us, those of you who are listening even today, we all want to be in that third category where we have a compelling message and we have a compelling way to share that message with others. And so that's how I've gotten to the place where I'm at in terms of my communication.
Well, I would also add to that you definitely have a gift for this type of work. I've worked with many people who want to be good communicators, and their natural instincts are just a little awkward. And as hard as they can try and study and boot camp, there's just that it factor, that charisma, that authenticity that doesn't ring through. So I also want to honor that you have a gift, and I could see it right away. I always know when someone has it. And you definitely do that, but you're making the most of it. And you're right. We have to work on finding ways to share our message and tell our stories as communicators, no matter if you're doing faith communication or it's secular or it's B2B type work, is that we need to craft messages and deliver them in ways that people want to listen to them. They want to be a part of that engagement.
Absolutely.
From all that you have done and studied and kind of seen, what tips do you have, or do you have any tips for someone who wants to improve their public speaking skills, that when you knew you were going to do more of it, that you really focused on this, or here's a nugget I learned in an experience or a boot camp?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think public speaking is something that anyone can improve on. You mentioned that I have a gift. The truth is that all of us have a gift for communicating. I think all of us have a message to share. All of us have something that we can share to make a difference in the lives of other people. I know that for a lot of people, they're very fearful of public speaking. I think one of the things that I would encourage people who want to start public speaking is that they would start small. And what I mean by that is start by practicing your communication with someone else. So your everyday conversation, the conversations you have with your parents or your in-laws or a neighbor, practice the skills that you would need in a public forum and practice them privately. So that's the first thing that I would say. I think the other thing that I would say regarding public speaking is it's important for a communicator to begin to ask some questions. The quality of the answers you get are dependent on the quality of the questions you ask. And so here's some questions that every communicator must ask. First of all is, where are they at? And the they is the people, the audience that you're going to be sharing a message with. These are the questions I ask myself. What do they need and what do they know? What do they need in this moment? What's their felt need? What is their concern? What is the problem they're facing? And what do they currently know? Sometimes it's not possible to know what they know, but even asking the question helps you think about the person who doesn't know or who may not know. So you come from a place of assuming that they don't know. And if they don't know, how can you explain it so that they do know? When we make assumptions in public communication, we make some jumps in our communication, just believing that they already know something. But if we take the time to talk to someone who doesn't know, how would we explain it? Also, another question when it comes to where are they at? What is the problem that they're facing that they need solved? And what is the felt need that a message that we can share can fulfill that felt need? So really identifying where they're at is important. And then the second sort of broad category is, where do I need to take them? Or where do they want to go? And so part of what I think about is, What do I want them to know that speaks to their mind, their knowledge? What do I want them to think about? So are there questions that I want to ask very strategically in a message so that they can contemplate, so they can process the idea that I'm sharing? What do I want them to see? What visual do I want them to see? And that leads into what they feel. So the things that I present to them, whether it's through story, whether it's through visual imagery, whether it's through video, what I want them to see, what do I want them to feel? What is the emotional experience that I want to generate within them? And then what are the action steps? What do I want to encourage them to do? How can they take action on what I'm sharing? And so you're thinking on all of those levels. The other piece is really knowing your audience. It's important for you to know your audience. Is it a group of professionals? Is it a group of middle schoolers? Is it a diverse group, a multi-generational group? Is it high schoolers? Is it moms from a PTA? You're constantly asking those questions, thinking about who is my audience? And I think the more we can understand who we're communicating to, the better we can communicate to them. And then finally, how will I get them there? How can I help them get where they need to be? So that's the third bucket. What message can I give them that will not only name the need in the problem, but also provide a solution? And you begin to think about, what are the major messages? What are the main points you want to share? I often think about them as sticky statements. I try to frame my important points into sticky statements, very short statements that are distilled down, that communicate the major message, because short and sweet is sticky, and helping them have memorable statements, it increases the likelihood that after the message is completed, they're going to retain it and hold on to it. Then I think about the spice of messages, which are stories and illustrations. What stories can I tell? What's the best story that I can tell? What is the best illustration that I can offer to help them really deep seed the message? And so those are some of the questions that we as communicators need to ask in advance. I would also say this, that it's important for us to begin with the end in mind. It's important to know where you want to land the plane. I heard one communicator talk about that the most important parts of your talk are the takeoffs and the landings. Takeoffs and landings. Takeoffs is where you present the problem and you present the fact that there is a need for a solution. Then you have your major message, and then you land the plane. Just like in flying, the part of flying that requires the most investment from the pilot is the takeoff and the landing. And often what I find in communication is we're really good at focusing on the middle, but takeoffs and landings are the most important part. And so I actually spend more time on my takeoffs and my landings than I even do on the middle of my message, because I'm setting up the problem, presenting the need for a solution, then I'm articulating it, and then I'm landing the plane and saying, okay, I've shared with you a couple things, but here's the one thing you must do. Here's the one thing that's going to make a difference in your life. Here's your next action step. In a faith context, this is what God is wanting to do in your life, and here's how you can take action on that. So those are just some quick, off the top of my head, thoughts about how people can improve their public communication.
Oh, it's very well said. So powerful. And if anyone was wondering, I wonder why she had a pastor on there for her podcast, that's exactly why. Because everything you said is so much of what I've heard or I've presented or shared with clients or held and spoke to during a workshop. Because you have to speak to people's real problem. That'll engage them right away. It lights them up and they're like, okay, good. You are speaking to me. You're meeting people where they are emotionally. You do a very good job of kind of reading the room when you're doing it. But that stickiness is wildly important, and stories are so important for that factor. But landing the plane, oh my gosh. So many times I'm like, quit circling the airport and land the plane. What are you trying to say? So a lot of times with talks or working with media, we actually reverse out. We know what the end is, and we start and we work backwards from there. Like if I don't have time to say anything else, I must land the plane and say this very important message.
Yes.
So it's really interesting, the perspectives of both parts of that communication sandwich are very important, and it makes a whole lot of sense.
Absolutely, it does. And I think it reflects honor to the people who have given you their time. That's the thing about public communication, or about communication in general, is that people are trading their most valuable resource, which is time to listen. I have the privilege of being in a context where we actually have thousands of people who come on a weekend. And I think about the time value that they're exchanging. They're basically saying, this is worth my time. And so the time I invest is honoring the time that they're giving to me and giving to this institution to learn and to grow. And so you just think about, what would somebody get paid in their job? They're giving up an hour of their time. When you look at that across thousands, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of investment if you were to compensate them for their time. And so I think as communicators, I often think about that is they're trading their time, and they're wanting their time that they've given to us, that they've entrusted to us, they're wanting to get some value. You know, there's this law called the law of equivalent exchange. People exchange one thing for something else, and they're hoping that what they exchange is of equivalent value to what they've given up. So I think as communicators, we need to look at it that way, that they have given us their time, and in turn, we need to give them something that's worthy of that time. And that just shows respect, that just shows honor, that just shows a real perception and awareness that people are giving something they can't earn back, they can't get back, and we need to be prudent with the time that they give us.
I really like that. It does sound very respectful, which is important. And that might have answered actually my next question, and I'll tell you why. So a little backstory for my listeners, if you don't know me well, I'm a faithful person, but my journey aligning and kind of finding my place has come down to what has that time return been. And we were talking in a communication circle I'm in about the return on investment, but that return on experience, and what has experience been. So you do a great job of really giving people back more than they probably even realized or hoped for during that experience exchange. And I think that speaks to why the church, I've really noticed from day one, you have such diverse members and all kinds of backgrounds and life experiences there. And you know that some people have lived through some really challenging times, and there's some people that just look like they're suited up and they look like they've never had a hard day in their life. But what do you think really contributes to, Westover Hill's ability to attract such diverse members and really keep them a part of the congregation?
So I think it's a great question, by the way. I think part of it is we have made a concerted effort for a long time to make sure that our church looks like the community we're a part of. It's not about having a certain number of this generation or this ethnicity, but we wanted to be a church where people from our community, everyone from our community, would be welcome. And I'm pleased to say that by and large, the attendance of our church is reflective of the demographic of our community in terms of generations, in terms of racial and ethnic background, in terms of culture, all of that. And I think that's just a testament to our current lead pastor, Pastor Jim. He made that decision a long time ago. And this is just a fact. For a long time, the most segregated hour of a week was church. And I think we have just worked hard to make sure that that's not the case at Westover. We want to be a church where people from the community feel welcome, and we're crafting programming, we're crafting messages, we're crafting experiences for people that appeal to a broad group of people, to people from various backgrounds in terms of financial backgrounds. We have single moms, we have two-parent earners, we have people who are middle class, we have people who are upper class, we have people who are students, we have a group called the Classics. We have ministry from 0 to 75, really, 85, 95. And the whole purpose is we want the church to look like our community. But I'll say this as a person of faith, and this is just my perspective. I think this is I'll pull the curtain back a little bit. But we want our church to look like heaven. And we just think that heaven is going to be a diverse place where we're all unified, but there's going to be that diversity still retained in heaven of people coming from various tribes and various tongues and various places. And we just seek to have that here. We want to be a place where people come and they feel welcomed, and they feel like this is a place where they will be invested in, where they'll be championed, where we'll come alongside them to help them grow. And we've just intentionally said, we're going to be a multi-church. We're going to be a church that's multi-generational, multi-ethnic, multi-racial, multi in terms of financial background. And that's okay. We want to take people where they're at and find ways to advance them. So we've just made that a focus of what we want our church to be. And I'm just grateful to be a part of a church that does that.
It's really true. If you know me or if you're listening, you know that I have that real talk type of hard, honest conversations. And Pastor Jonathan is not exaggerating. And I would go one step further and saying sometimes even more diverse than what our San Antonio city looks like. Really all representation. And when I actually sat in a service and experienced my first afternoon of church, I felt like, wow, this does feel like what heaven should be like, because my brain was completely swirling. My paradigm was like just dancing around going, who's in this room? There are so many people in this room. There's so many types of people in this room. And as someone who studies multicultural aspects of communication and PR and does Hispanic Latino work and gets into diversity and inclusion, I thought they're doing something right. And I've been trying to analyze it since. I think you're right on that, really looking at this in terms of showing respectfulness, programming, the messaging, representation on stage, very, very diverse, even the choir, a music group. But you could be sitting there and there's someone with neck tattoos next to you and a necktie on the other side of you, and it does not matter. And I say that very clearly so that people can imagine that very vast difference, but everyone is there kind of for a unified purpose. And that's really, really something to experience. And I really enjoy that. And so I think it's important that you share your perspective, Pastor Jonathan, because no matter what type of organization our listeners are coming from or thinking about, or even if they have their own businesses, if you can capture this concept of being a multi-organization, right? Or a multi-business owner or consultant or coach or pastor, I think that's so powerful. Our census says nothing but we're more diverse than ever. America's more multicultural than ever. We have listeners from, different parts of the globe. And this is a yes plus society we're in. And so I love your take on that. Thank you so much.
If I can just also say, Melissa, I think my life experience has prepared me for this. And I'll just share a little bit more about my story. My father's white and my mom's Hispanic. I grew up in a very rural, very low socioeconomic town. People who were humble, who spoke Spanish primarily. And then I go from this small, humble town with wonderful people, just some of the most beautiful people you'd ever meet, who would give their shirt off their back just to take care of you and to help. And then I go to a place like Stanford, which is one of these places of academic learning. And so I go from a real humble place with really great people to this place where it's this institute of academic learning where people are really just developing their mind. And the other thing is that I've grew up on the border, and I've always felt like I'm someone to build bridges with people. I think I'm very comfortable with that. I went to a place, Stanford, a great academic institution. I got a remarkable education. But faith isn't always celebrated there. There are people who do celebrate faith, but faith isn't really celebrated to the extent that it is in other places. And so what that education did, whether it's just my formative years growing up, and by the way, I speak Spanish and I say, hola, ¿cómo están? And so I've just had this real kind of compelling sense that I need to be a bridge builder to people, that I need to find ways to connect with diverse people. And so I'm multiracial, I'm multicultural. I have an academic education, I'm a professional, but I came from a humble place. And so I think all of these things, the amalgamation of all of these things, all this being brought together, has really given me a sensitivity to that. And it's just a personal importance to me that we're that kind of community. But I would say, and again, this is from a faith perspective, God prepared me in advance to be in this place and to minister in this place, to serve people in this way.
Yeah, it's really incredible. I mean, they're all different steps we take. And if we think about them and if we try to be intentional along the way, they're definitely building blocks that will really honor all of our work and what we try to do. But, this has all been super interesting. I think it's been an interesting ride for the listeners to go from us talking about faith and then getting into the secular applications. And is there anything else you think that as PR pros or those that work in advertising, marketing, those who just communicate because it's the foundation of us as people, what should we know or what can we glean from faith communication in particular that could help us?
Great question. My take is this: everybody has an important message to share, something that can add value. I heard John Maxwell, one of the great leadership gurus, if you will, of our time. Somebody asked him, John, how is it that you wake up every day ready to go? How is it that you're 75 and you still get up with enthusiasm about what you're doing? And what he said is, I wake up every day believing I'm called to add value to someone. And so he says, that's the thing that motivates me. And I think when we talk about PR, when we talk about public speaking, there's something about our life and our story and our experience that can add value to someone else. And we may think it's just part of our story, but I would say to the listeners, somebody needs to hear your story. Somebody needs to know how you've gotten to the place that you're at. The fact that you're still standing in spite of all of the difficulties, somebody needs to be encouraged by your story and by what you can offer. And so I would say, be open-handed about how you can add value to people, whether it's through your words, whether it's through gestures, whether it's through helping out. Find some way to make a difference and add value to someone else. And if you're an up-and-coming communicator, if all you do is add value, what will end up happening is there's going to come a point in time when people know you and people are going to want to hear what you have to say because you're constantly giving them something that makes a difference in their life. And so that's what I would say as a primary target. And do all that you can to craft your message, have the art and the science. So there's the art of public communication, there's the science of it. The science is really the structure, it's the messaging, it's crafting clarity in your messaging, making sure that you can communicate your message to an 8-year-old. If you can communicate your message effectively to an 8-year-old and they get it, then it's likely that anyone else can get it. Mm-hmm. So that's the structure. But the art of it is finding out what makes you tick. I always think about it this way. What would I want to hear? What story would I want to hear that would move me? What humorous anecdote could I offer? What could I include into the story that would make it meaningful and memorable? And so what I would say, just to bring this thought to a close, is it's believing that there's something about your life and your story and your experience or your skill set that you can entrust to someone else that will make a difference. If that's the focus, you're going to make a difference.
Absolutely 100% agree with that. Very, very powerfully said. One of the public speaking tips that I heard, especially for those who are nervous about public speaking, which is most people, is when you said, "Oh, I took a class and I loved it." I'm like, that's unique. I wrote down. But yeah, if you give a talk or if it's your time to speak, if you just think about adding value to one person, that takes a lot of weight off for most people when they do public speaking. But in our profession as well, that's really, really important. I had a team member who said, I did a lot of work in the church and I don't know about public relations because I want to do more of that work. I'm like, this is very purpose-filled work. If you want to do more for a church, you can absolutely do that. And you can use your skills from this work in it. But as well as doing public relations, you can really help so many people in that way too. So that value add and adding values is helpful and important. And you said art and science, and it made me think of yes, when we speak or communicate, we need to speak to things not only from our head and all the facts and the data and the big data and everything that intimidates people sometimes, but from the heart. So we're using our head and heart as well as, this art and science place. I love that. So Pastor Jonathan, what does this idea of smart talk mean to you?
I was thinking about this question since I got the questions. And what I was thinking about is that, again, it goes back to this idea that we can add value, we can make a difference. I think taking the time to craft a message that can make a difference is very helpful. You mentioned something a little earlier, and I want to just highlight. One of the things that I do pre-communicating, there's some things that I say to myself, and one of them is I'm here to bless and not impress. I can't take credit for it. It's actually the Joseph Grenny, the writer of Crucial Conversations and Crucial Accountability. I heard him in some video I watched one time, and he said this: before I go up to speak, I always say, I'm here to bless and not impress. And so he says, I walk in with this idea that it's not about me, it's about them. He says, when I'm able to focus on them and not myself, it helps. The other thing that I would say is to the communicators out there, they say that the first 90 seconds is the hardest part of your talk. And so that's when your nerves will go up the highest. But if you can make it past 90 seconds, you're good. It's one of the reasons why I encourage communicators to practice what they're communicating in advance. I'll tell you this, the best communicators, what they do is they practice their message before they communicate it publicly, and they do it in the way that they're going to communicate it. For example, I stand up and I speak. So whenever I run through my message, what I do is I stand up and I speak it out loud. I stand up, I speak it out loud, and if I have a mirror in front of me, I do it in front of a mirror. What that does is that lets me see myself. It allows me to practice it in the way that I'm going to communicate it later. What that does is that creates some muscle memory, that creates some familiarity with the message. And again, I want to just encourage people to practice your message. I heard someone say, a TED Talk speaker said that he practiced his message like 80 times before he communicated it to make sure that it was not only in his head, but it's in his heart. And I've discovered that when you can take the message from your head to your heart and you really know it, you can communicate not only the message, but you can communicate the heart. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's important to prepare your message and to craft it ahead of time, because in communication, there's two elements. There's preparing the message and preparing the messenger. Those two elements are important. If we have the message down, but we're not prepared, then it'll take us a little bit of time to get in the rhythm. And we've all seen communicators who come up and it takes them a little bit of time to settle in. But the best communicators, they start great from the very beginning. And what they've done is they've prepared not only the message, but they prepared themselves. Like I said, also, be a student of the best communicators. Watch what they do. Mimic what they do. Look at how they do. And then bring in the best elements from each communicator. Some communicator may share really great at sticky statements. Some may do a really great job with their storytelling. Some people may be really great at landing the plane. Bring all those together. And then over time, what you'll discover is you'll put them into who you are, your personality, your temperament, how you communicate what's most authentic to you. You'll find your own voice. You'll bring these things together and it can make a difference. But it all starts with making the decision that we want to be a good, effective communicator because the message we have to share can make a difference. If we start there, then all these other things we can add on and it can make an impact.
Yeah, this tremendous amount of tips, Pastor Jonathan. Like, I'm taking all these notes. I hope my listeners stop and re-listen and take some good notes there because to your point, watching the masters and learning from them. And God would want me to be honest and tell you that that's why you're on this show today. So I can learn from you. It's fantastic. So there's a lot of great information, and I'm sure people are curious about your church and you. So what's the best way for our listeners to connect with you?
The best way for people to connect with me is on social media. They can just send me DMs. I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram at J Mussett. It's J, the first letter of my first name, and then Mussett, Mussett. You can just reach out to me that way. And if you want to learn more about the church that we're a part of, just at Westover Hills. And we're on the major platforms. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, and we have a website, westoverhills.church. So, on the website, there's a way for you to connect with me via email. You can just email me as well at pastorjohn@westoverhills.church. Love to see how I can add value to you. And that's how people can connect with me.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Pastor Jonathan, for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with us today.
It's my pleasure. And again, I just want to say thank you so much for entrusting your time to both Melissa and I. We hope that this has added value to you. And we're offering you our best wishes and our prayers as you advance as a public communicator. Be blessed.
Thanks to our listeners for joining me for today's episode. We're creating this podcast with you in mind. Leave us a rating or review to share what you find valuable. Help us reach more pros by sharing episodes you've learned from. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a thing. And as always, think smart and communicate smart. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Smart Talk series. If you learned something or enjoyed our conversation, share it on social media or send to a friend. To learn more about this and other communication topics, visit mvw360.com. That's mvw360.com.